Welcome to episode 232 of the Healthy Habit Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dayan of Healthy Habit Medical Center. And look who's back for our monthly check-in here with Natural Factors, Yolanda Fenton, who was last with us on episode 220, about 12 episodes ago. And today we're going to be breaking down gut health and the evolving science of the microbiome with Yolanda, who's Director of Product Innovation for Natural Factors. And Yolanda spent close to 30 years in the natural product, nutraceutical supplement industry, advancing product development and education. Her focus and passion for spotting product trends has helped to direct the dynamic evolution and growth of the amazing company Natural Factors. Yolanda, thanks for joining us. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me again.
So this is an important topic. Why did you choose to highlight this one? How important is gut health in general before we dive into the nitty-gritty, the specifics, and some product suggestions people might want to have on their radar? But how important is this microbiome, gut health in this evolving world?
I think that probiotics are, without question, one of the most important categories, if you want to look at it from like a business economics perspective. But in terms of health, I definitely think it is the right place to start. That saying, you are what you eat, couldn't be more true.
Right.
Even people that are on a path to, eating healthier and just overall improving their health, perhaps because they had either a previous illness or condition, or perhaps their diet wasn't very good. It does take time, for the body to heal itself, and get onto that, path of healing. But when you eat healthy, you're going to feel better, you're going to have more energy. And a lot of that has to do with what's going on in your gut. And of course, we'll dive a little bit more into that. I often get asked, I think I mentioned this in the previous podcast, there's so many supplements to choose from.
Right.
It's overwhelming. Probiotics are a great place to start. It's definitely one of my top three products that people should take.
And yeah, we have so much research now at this point, over hundreds, thousands of papers on the benefits of probiotics, both in animal and human research at this point. Why are they so important? I agree. I mean, it's like a staple, maybe up there with omega-3s, multivitamin, but probiotics are
Yeah.
critical. Why do we need them? Why are they so important? I want to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe just step back a little bit just to define probiotics, because I think they're, surprisingly, given how long probiotics have been around and certainly embedded in so many different cultures, especially in Southeast Asia, where probiotics are not just a supplement that you take, but, that are found obviously in a lot of foods that are just, made, obviously
Right.
a lot of fermented foods. But probiotics are defined as like live microorganisms that, when taken in adequate amounts, confer, adequate health benefits, specifically the digestive system. But there's more to it than just that. We think, or tend to think, that probiotics are only good for digestive upset or
Right.
dysbiosis. But we know that that's not the case, that it can extend to just more than that, to mood health, to cardiovascular health, to cognitive health, and so forth. I think it's interesting, the origin of the microbiota can be dated back to like the early 1900s. It was found that a vast number of microorganisms, so not just bacteria or probiotics, but like yeasts and
Mm.
viruses, that they all coexist in various states and throughout the entire body. Again, a lot of people think that good bacteria or probiotics only exist in the gut, and that's not the case. They live in our oral cavity. They live within our skin. They live in our lungs. They live, in our vaginal tract. So they
Right.
they pretty much are throughout the entire body. Just to keep things into perspective, there are more bacteria in the intestines than there are cells in the body. 700 species of bacteria living in our intestines at any one time. About 85% of normal gut flora is made up of beneficial bacteria, obviously the bacteria that we want more of in our gut. And then also, I think about it from this perspective, a lot of people don't realize that probiotics are also very important. In fact, they're essential for helping to manufacture or synthesize vitamins that we would get from the foods that we eat. So they're
Right.
broken down, right, from the food that we eat to help release energy and to do all of these wonderful things in our body. So the 85% of beneficial bacteria, the 15% is made up of what we would call unfavorable pathogens or bacteria. And that's okay. We need some of those bacteria, but we just want to make sure that we have a state of what we call eubiosis, my apologies, as opposed to dysbiosis, which is
Mm.
the inverse, right? When we have
Got it.
more of the bad bacteria than we do the good bacteria. And then in terms of like the benefits, there are so many benefits, as I mentioned, right? When you have, digestive disturbances, whether it's too much inflammation, whether it's you've just eaten a bad meal, junk food or whatever, there's a lot of inflammation. So the good bacteria, the probiotics are beneficial to help quell that
Right.
inflammation and just give you a general feeling of good health. But again, we'll go a little bit more into some of the specific areas that it can benefit.
Right. And as you just hinted at, it helps us actually absorb the nutrients of our normal diet, right? It helps us digest
Absolutely.
our food better. So while locally also addressing that inflammation and sealing up potential leaky gut, I would suggest if no one's ever had a stool test yet from a company like Genova Diagnostics,
Mm.
Mosaic, these are companies that we work with, specialty lab companies, that you should probably check that out as well because it might not be inflammation, might not be leaky gut, it might just be excess, imbalance of the microbiome. That's very common in America where a probiotic can help improve the ratios with the good and the bad bacteria. So tell us about DNA mapping. What does it mean when a
Mm.
probiotic is DNA mapped, and how does that actually translate to choosing a specific supplement or helping somebody with their gut health?
Yeah, so DNA mapping, I know this can get a little bit complicated for consumers, but DNA mapping is just essentially an identification test or method by which probiotics are identified, right? Because you want to make sure that the specific strain of probiotic that you see on a label, and you could have like a product that has one strain or two or multiple 12, 15 plus, and they've got a very specific name, right, to describe them,
Right.
lactobacillus acidophilus, whatever. So DNA mapping is used to identify that that is in fact that species, because unfortunately, with our industry, there are definitely some players that, cut corners and they don't actually have what's on the label. So most of the probiotic suppliers, the reputable suppliers, and there are, a handful globally.
Right.
Natural Factors has been dealing with one supplier in particular, which we feel, they're amongst the top in the industry. They've been doing it for almost, gosh, 120 years. They go that far back.
Wow.
And, DNA mapping is one of many of the different types of identification methods and just overall quality tests that's conducted. You're not going to see any reference to DNA mapping on a label, but just I know you asked that question, right?
Right.
Because it might be something that people see on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. So all of the probiotic options here through natural factors are DNA mapped.
Absolutely.
Right.
I just want to reference, it was a study back, I think it was in 2016 in the journal Nature. And there have been obviously more recent studies, but they found that about 94% of commercial probiotic capsules that were tested at the University of California contained completely different strains than what was mentioned on the label.
Wow.
Yeah, and again, like that's why when we talk about when you're buying a product, not just a probiotic supplement, but when you're buying a product, a natural health product, it's so important to buy it from a brand that's reputable, that's been around, for a long time. A lot of people ask me, how do I decipher amongst all of the different probiotics or different, natural products that are available online in particular? And I always say, ideally, you want to buy it from a brick and mortar store that like
Right.
exists in a physical space and obviously also happens to have an online presence, an e-com, outlet. And then amongst those, you're going to have, reputable brands that have a history. Because would you feel more comfortable buying your probiotic from a company that's been around for 20, 30, 40 years versus a company that's been around for a year?
Exactly.
Yeah. So when it comes to probiotics, it is buyer beware. And really do go for a brand that has a reputation.
So for someone new to the probiotic world entirely, they've just been listening to podcasts and they've been reading health information online, and now they know for sure that they're important. They've been hearing from friends or family maybe like their health's improved because of taking a probiotic, and they're standing in front of some natural factors options. What have you seen over the years has been the most common starting point for somebody that's brand new to the world of probiotics? They just want to
Mm.
start improving their health. Obviously, age plays a role, but we're not giving any formal medical advice here, but just a
Yeah.
general common starting point that you've seen with probiotics through natural factors.
Great question, because I know that it is so overwhelming for people, especially in the last, it's probably been about 8 years where we've seen this introduction of like super high potency probiotics, like
Right.
100 billion. I've seen like 200 billion from naturopathic like practitioner outlets. Not typically something you would see in a health store per se, but you can go as low as like a 5 billion. All the way up to 100 billion,
Right.
and that can be very confusing for the consumer. It really depends on the individual. If you have someone that is just saying, hey, I heard probiotics are beneficial for me, I don't really have any major issues, but I just want to make sure that I'm giving my health all the benefits possible. And in that case, I would say, if your diet is healthy and you're active, you can start off with something very basic. Natural Factors has a great product, 1212, which is basically 12 strains, 12 billion potency. And that's something that you can take on a daily basis. Even one per day is sufficient. And then just basically take that, in perpetuity. Whereas if somebody had just finished, a course of antibiotics, and maybe they take antibiotics on a regular basis because maybe they have, recurring allergies, a lot of inflammation in the body. In that particular case, I would advise with something completely different, maybe something like a 24 billion. So usually the way I like to recommend is the more acute the condition is, the higher the potency of the probiotic I would recommend for a short period of time. And then you can go after that onto what we would call maintenance, daily maintenance basis, and then you can reduce the potency of the product. There are definitely some condition-specific probiotics. I touched earlier upon probiotics are not just for the digestive health,
Right.
but also for mood support, for helping with your immune system, to help improve your lipid profile if you have elevated LDL cholesterol levels. If you have, cognitive dysfunction, there are very specific probiotic blends. Natural Factors, for example, has a calm probiotic, which is beneficial for people that maybe are experiencing higher levels of stress and
Very good.
anxiety and just need something that's going to help them. And again, people might not necessarily connect the dots with, well, how are probiotics going to help my brain function and my mood health? Well, we've heard of the gut-brain axis, right? So it's basically how our brain is communicating to our gut and vice versa. Because when you think about all of the cells that exist in our gut, they're connected very, very intimately with our brain and with our immune system. And so that's why you have that benefit when you're taking a particular product, for mood support, to help with
Right.
stress as well. So lots of different options for consumers to pick from.
I'm going to do a quick screen share here straight from naturalfactors.com. This is the ultimate probiotic 12 by 12 formula. And then, but straight from this page, you can actually click right over to their, um, well, it was gone now, but you can kind of toggle back and forth between the 24 and the 12 billion here under the strength. So Yolanda was just mentioning the 12 by 12 for just general. If you're new to the probiotic world, we're not treating any specific medical condition. You're just trying to look for a starting point. This is a really common one. But then you can also go 24 by 12 if you are coming off a course of antibiotics potentially. Run that by your physician that prescribed the antibiotic. I know a lot of docs already have started prescribing probiotics alongside an antibiotic prescription. Even in the conventional world, it started happening, Yolanda. I don't know if you knew that, but kind of like vitamin D and
Mm-hmm.
vitamin B12, things like that. They're slowly trickling in to the conventional clinics as well. So yeah, these are two options, 24 by 12. And if you look at the actual breakdown of probiotics in the product, which are all DNA mapped, like Yolanda was just mentioning, you can see what we need is the lactobacilli and the bifidobacterium. How important is that, Yolanda, specifically? And there's all the different specific strains in these individual families. Since the lactobacillus is one family, then you have the bifidobacterium as another family, and then each one of these are specific ones of the family. So what are some, give a quick recap, like when we're talking about diseases that have been shown to benefit from specific lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, like UTIs, even certain types of cancers are being studied,
Mm-hmm.
inflammation, and what else are the key, like on your radar, top three benefits of these specific families?
Well, I know it gets a bit confusing when we talk about the different types of strains of probiotics because there are
Right.
literally thousands of them. But
Yeah.
there are, sort of two main families, the Lactobacillus acidophilus and the Lactobacillus bifidum bacteria.
Right.
And think about it this way, when you look at the entirety of the body, probiotics reside obviously in a lot of areas of our body, not just in our gut, as I mentioned, in our oral cavity, in our vaginal tract, in our lungs, believe it or not, because previously we thought our lungs were sterile and had
Right.
no probiotics probiotics whatsoever. Certain parts of our body tend to have more of the lactobacillus acidophilus, whereas other parts of our body have more of the bifidobacteria, and
Got it.
they definitely cross over in terms of what they do, but there also are specific benefits. I think the top benefits, as I mentioned, are I can't discount the importance of bifidobacteria, and particularly helping to synthesize the vitamins that we get right from what we eat. So providing we're eating well, we're going to be getting the benefits from those good foods.
Yeah.
But in terms of conditions, as I said, like you're going to definitely notice that your digestive system overall is better. But beyond that, I definitely think for people that are looking to help lower their LDL cholesterol levels, because again, this isn't something that we're hearing a lot about. I definitely think that there are some formulas that have a lactobacillus acidophilus in them, like the 1212, for example, does,
Right.
that would be beneficial for helping to, help reduce the lipid profiles, the LDL in particular. Antibiotic usage, we talked a little bit about that earlier. Unfortunately, so many people are being prescribed antibiotics, and yes, antibiotics are obviously essential, but boy, if you're continually taking them, they really can disrupt the
Right.
microbiota long term, and then that can cause so many different problems. So I would definitely say that's one of the main reasons I would want people to take a probiotic formula. Again, having a blend of both the lactobacillus acidophilus and the bifidobacterium. When you're traveling, for example, and you get travelers associated diarrhea, which is very common, right, because of foodborne
Right.
pathogens, right, that exist because of the water or what have you. That tends to be more of the bifidobacterium that is helping with those particular pathogens in helping to prevent the traveler's diarrhea, as an example.
Amazing. And again, naturalfactors.com. You guys can check out more there. And these are just two that we highlighted as common starting points. They have much more. They have they have men specific formulas, women specific formulas as well, Yolanda, correct?
That's right. Yeah, Natural Factors has been a leader in the probiotic category for many, many years. In Canada, of course, we've been around a lot longer in Canada
Right.
because we are a Canadian company in terms of being family owned. But we've been a probiotic leader in Canada for decades. And in the US, we've been a probiotic leader for a very long time now. And we have, your sort of basic start type formulas that, are for people that would just be kind of introduced into this category. And then
Right.
we have condition specific, as I mentioned, the calm probiotic is one example. Gender specific, male, female formulas. Obviously for females, females do tend to get UTI infections. And so obviously we're going to have the strains rather in that formula that are a little bit more geared towards helping to prevent the bacteria from adhering, right, to the
Right.
lining of the bladder walls. And then, as you mentioned, men's formula, seniors formula, and then the higher probiotic blends, like the 100 billion, as I mentioned.
Amazing. Thanks for that overview. You could see if you're following along on YouTube, it's nice. You could see exactly what I'm sharing. But for the audio listeners, naturalfactors.com, you could just go to their collections and then go to the probiotics section. Probiotics and enzymes, technically, they're grouped together, and you can see everything there. So amazing. That's a good intro. You even have the ultimate probiotic critical care. As you mentioned, some formulas go up to 100 billion with 9 strains. So it really just depends on what's going on. And that's where
One,
it helps. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say that one thing just to mention again, the advantage obviously that I offer, right, being that we are a Canadian manufacturer, we're able to offer some insights, right, as
Right.
to the regulatory requirements in Canada versus in the US.
Okay.
And my goodness, it's very applicable to probiotics. So in
Uh-huh.
Canada, with probiotic formulas, the potency that is expressed on your label, whether it's on the front panel or the side panel, has to be at time of expiry. In the
Uh-huh.
US, not so. In the US, most of the probiotic brands, what they do is usually they express the potency at time of manufacture. Now, consumers probably are not aware that when you buy a probiotic formula, whether it's refrigerated or whether it's on shelf, so out of refrigerator, because you can have
Yeah.
both, that you have to add an overage, meaning if you want your formula to be a total of 10 billion at time of expiry,
Yeah.
there's a certain overage that you have to add in order to keep that 10 billion by the time that product expires. And usually probiotics are 2-year expiry. Some of them can be 3 years, but that's kind of pushing it. So
Interesting.
when companies add that overage, it's a formula, right? That as long as it's kept in, cool conditions and not exposed to, long-term heat, it's going to meet that time of expiry. it's an
Right.
advantage to obviously list the time of manufacture because sometimes the overage can be 2, 3, 4 times the amount. Meaning, if it's a 10 billion, you could literally have upwards of a 40 billion overage,
Wow.
right, to meet that time of expiry. So when
Interesting.
a lot of American brands are putting the time of manufacture, it's really important that consumers look out for this. Natural Factors 100% lists time of expiry on all of their labels. And that obviously is very important, but it also puts us at a disadvantage, especially online, because there's so many brands that you're comparing, various products against one another.
Right.
So I just wanted to mention that because I do
That's
think, again,
huge.
it's kind of like that buyer beware sort of thing. And that's why, again, it's important to buy from brands that are transparent and reputable, have a long history in our industry.
That's very important. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, like every word, every number on the label matters. There's a reason why it's there, right? We need to know what's going on there, and we appreciate the transparency. That's why we keep
Mhm.
having Natural Factors on, and
Yeah.
as a great partner with Healthy Habit here. So you mentioned antibiotics a little bit, like the value of considering a probiotic after a course of an antibiotic. But tell us about antibiotic profile. I have this in my
Mhm.
show notes here for today. Natural
Yeah.
Factors, they mention antibiotic profile in their materials. What is meant by that exactly? Antibiotic profile.
Yeah, so antibiotic profile refers to the company. It goes through a process by which they're identifying which strains are more compatible with antibiotic usage.
Very interesting.
Previously, there was this assumption that if you take antibiotics, you should absolutely not take probiotics at the same time, and that's not the case. And there's sort of two categories that I would divide that into. Some people, when they take antibiotics, and it's upwards of like 5 to 35% of people who tend to get side effects of antibiotics, which generally tends to be diarrhea, loose stools. Not a big deal, but it can be obviously inconvenient. And in some cases, it could be quite inconvenient. And then there are other, side effects that people experience, but those are the main ones. But some people can experience, just general dysbiosis, right? Like general dyspepsia, I should say,
Right.
gut rumblings, bloating, whatever. So in those cases, the benefit of taking a probiotic simultaneously to antibiotic therapy is that the probiotics are there more so to help with the side effects of the antibiotic. So it
Okay.
helps mitigate or reduce those side effects.
Right.
So definitely in those cases, if you know that you tend to get these side effects in a more, intense manner, then definitely take probiotics. And in terms of which one, I definitely think the 12-12 is a great idea. You don't have to go like super high. Now, in terms of if you're like, okay, I take antibiotics or I've taken antibiotics and I kind of get loose stools, but it's really not a big deal. In that case, I definitely think that probiotic therapy is still beneficial, but I would take it away from the antibiotic, meaning the timing. So take your antibiotic, and usually antibiotics are twice a day, right? Sometimes it could be once, but generally speaking, it's like morning, evening. Sometimes it could be 4 times per day. But
Right.
whenever you take your antibiotic, you just simply take the probiotic a couple of hours away from that antibiotic. You're still going to get the benefits of taking the probiotics because remember, the antibiotic is very specific at killing the pathogens, right? Getting rid of specific pathogens that are causing whatever infection, the doctor is obviously trying to help you, get rid of. So there are definitely significant benefit that people can get from supplementing with probiotics. So the antibiotic profiling, it basically means that the supplier has gone through all of this intense research to identify the best strains. And overall, the majority of the probiotics that we sell across all of our different probiotic formulas, they're antibiotic resistant in the sense that they can be taken at the same time. It doesn't mean that they're not necessarily not going to be killed off, but there's still going to be a colonization of the probiotic, meaning when you consume the probiotic, even when you're taking an antibiotic, they're still going to colonize in the gut and replicate. And
Right.
obviously, you're going to have more good bacteria.
Wow.
So again, just for consumers to understand that you can, and I think should take antibiotics. Sorry, I keep saying antibiotics, but I mean
I got you.
probiotics when the consumer
Interesting.
finishes the antibiotic, and again, it could be like 4 days, 7 days. I tend to find it's between 7 and 14 days that people are prescribed. That is when you definitely should up your probiotic, in my opinion, based on what we've seen in the research, just to help replenish the good bacteria that might have been lost as a result of the antibiotic therapy, but also because there is a lot of inflammation as a result of killing off a lot of the pathogens. Because remember, when you're killing off pathogens, they create metabolic byproducts, right? A lot of
Right.
like toxic, inflammatory, pro-inflammatory activity that we want to make sure that we're helping, get rid of. And so that's another benefit of taking probiotics after your
Right. It makes
antibiotic
sense.
therapy.
It makes
Yeah,
sense. And that was a great explanation, Yolanda. I appreciate that, especially if you take them together. Yeah, some might get killed off of the good bacteria that you're supplementing with, but enough gets through to begin that replication process to still create health benefits, right? So the key
absolutely.
is at least separate them by a few hours is typically what's recommended, like you said. That kind of answered my question. How can I know which probiotics I can take with certain antibiotics? Because you'll be having your bases covered. Basically, you went through and looked at the most commonly prescribed antibiotics in the country and seen which good bacteria are being killed off by those antibiotics, correct? And that's what we're trying to replenish.
Absolutely.
Amazing. It's fascinating that, you know, even though some can survive, right, we're still creating the right proportions because a lot of people think that all bacteria are killed off in a round of antibiotics. Can you quickly just
Yeah.
explain that process?
In terms of like how come that doesn't happen
Yeah,
or
like so a lot of people think when they take a round of antibiotics, everything's being killed off, right?
yeah,
So,
I
but
mean
there's still
maybe just
some
to
left over of good and bad,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, specific to your question, there are definitely studies that have been conducted. I mean, I can think of off the top of my head, like at least 5 studies that have been conducted. One was at the University of Toronto,
Yeah.
and they looked at, I think it was just over 3,000 patients. It might have even been closer to 3,500 patients, if I remember correctly. And basically, they split the groups and they had given one group probiotic therapy and the other group was placebo. And the entirety of the participants in this group had a pathogen. It was C. difficile infection, which is essentially when you're taking antibiotics at higher doses, it actually can create this particular type of a pathogen, or this particular pathogen can like take over because there's a lot of inflammation in our gut as a result of that antibiotic therapy.
Uh-huh.
And without question, the majority of the patients who were taking the probiotic therapy compared to those that were taking placebo, so they were not getting any probiotics, they had shown a statistically significant reduction in that pathogen C. difficile. So that clearly shows us that probiotics, even when being taken at the same time as antibiotics,
Yeah.
right, can infer a benefit. And so that
Got it.
clearly proves, right, that yeah, obviously some of the good bacteria from that probiotic were likely killed off.
Right.
But the fact, and I think it's important to remember that, to point out rather, that the potency was not very high. It was an 8 billion probiotic that the
Got it.
patients were
Interesting.
administered. Yeah, so 8 billion is not a lot. I mean,
Right.
certainly, I've heard people taking 25, 24 billion
50.
regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an example of one study, again, amongst many, right, that have been
Amazing.
conducted. And they do them usually at hospitals, right? Because that's another area where, patients unfortunately tend to contract
Right.
pathogens, unfortunately, right? And then, so it's just a good environment to conduct a study like that.
Well, that was informative. Appreciate your time, Yolanda. Coming on for episode 232, we covered, we did an intro to gut health, microbiome, set the stage for today's discussion. Why do we need probiotics? You covered antibiotic profiling and then DNA mapping as well of probiotics. We highlighted some of the most common starting points through natural factors when it comes to probiotics. And I appreciate that labeling requirement differentiation with Canada and US. I mean, these types of things are super important that our
Mm-hmm.
customers value, and that's why they keep coming back to Healthy Habit. So I'll leave it there for today. Naturalfactors.com, everybody. And I appreciate your time as always, Yolanda. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. J, and take care.